Picture this. You're watching a movie everyone said was just pretty good, and you're quietly falling apart. Not because you're dramatic, not because something is wrong with you, but because something about that story just cracked something open in you. And you have no idea why it hit that hard, and you definitely don't know how to explain it to the person sitting next to you who's already scrolling their phone. If that resonates, this video is for you. Here's what nobody tells you. Feeling things deeply isn't a personality flaw. It isn't sensitivity that needs to be toughened up, or emotions that need to be managed better, or some vague sign that you should talk to someone. In a lot of cases, it's a genuinely different neurological configuration, one that most of the world misreads as a weakness, when the research tells a very different story. You're not broken, you're not too much. You're just wired in a way most people don't fully understand, including probably you. Let's change that. Here's the first thing you need to know. Researchers have a name for this. Dr. Elaine Aron, a psychologist at Stony Brook University, spent decades studying what she called sensory processing sensitivity. And she found that roughly 15 to 20% of the population processes incoming information at a fundamentally deeper level than everyone else. Not metaphorically, neurologically. Their nervous systems don't just register stimuli, they process them more thoroughly, make more connections between pieces of information, and hold on to emotional data longer. Think about what that means in practice. You walk into a room and you've already clocked the tension between two people before a single word has been said. You hear a piece of music and you're not just noticing the melody, like you're feeling the intent behind it, some emotional undercurrent that pulls at something you can't name. You read a news story and it stays with you for days, not because you choose to dwell, but because your brain is still working it, still processing it, still connecting it to everything else you know and feel. Everyone else moved on. You're still in the room. This isn't oversensitivity, it's deep processing. And the difference matters. Now, here's where it gets genuinely fascinating. People who feel deeply don't just experience emotions more intensely, they're actually running a different neurochemical program. Research published in neuropsychobiology found that highly sensitive people show significantly higher brain activation in areas associated with empathy, awareness, and action planning. Their brains, when exposed to emotional stimuli, light up in regions most people barely activate. And a lot of that comes down to dopamine, specifically how their dopamine system responds to novelty and reward. For highly sensitive people, the reward circuit is more reactive to subtlety. You don't need a big, loud, obvious signal to feel something. You feel the quiet ones, the small kindnesses, the almost said things, the look someone gave you 3 weeks ago that you're still turning over in your mind. You know what other people call that? Overthinking. You know what it actually is? Extraordinarily fine-tuned pattern recognition running constantly in the background of your life. Let's talk about empathy for a second, and because this is where I think deeply feeling people are most profoundly misunderstood. There's a structure in the brain called the mirror neuron system. When you watch someone experience something, joy, pain, embarrassment, grief, your mirror neurons fire in a way that simulates that experience internally. You're not just observing, you're running a neurological parallel of what you're watching. This is the physical basis of empathy. For people who feel deeply, this system is on a higher gain, not just emotionally, perceptually. You absorb other people's states, you walk into a conversation, and by the end of it, you're carrying something that wasn't yours when you arrived. The heaviness you feel after spending time with certain people isn't weakness. It's your nervous system doing exactly what it was built to do. It's just doing it more completely than most. The problem isn't the system. The problem is no one handed you an instruction manual. Here's something that probably feels uncomfortably familiar. You've been told at some point in your life, maybe by a partner, maybe a parent, maybe just a culture that rewards whatever the opposite of this is, that you feel too much, that you need to develop a thicker skin, that you're being too sensitive, that the intensity with which you experience things is somehow inconvenient. And there's a part of you that absorbed that started treating your own depth as a liability. Here's the reframe. Studies from the journal Social Cognitive and Affective Neuroscience found that people high in emotional depth consistently outperform others in reading social situations accurately. They're better at detecting deception, better at sensing when someone isn't okay, even when that person is insisting they're fine, better at picking up on group dynamics and subtle power shifts. The thing that made you too sensitive in certain rooms is the exact same thing that makes you quietly indispensable in others. You see things, you catch things. You feel the thing coming before most people know there's anything to feel. That's not a flaw. That's a gift. one that went unrecognized because it doesn't look impressive until you see what it produces. Let's talk about the dark side because I'm not going to pretend this wiring is all upside. People who feel deeply are also disproportionately affected by overstimulation. Loud environments, chaotic social situations, conflict. These don't just register as unpleasant. They can be genuinely dysregulating. The same nervous system that catches everything beautiful also catches everything harsh, everything cruel, everything that's slightly off. It doesn't filter selectively. It's high resolution in every direction. And here's where people who feel deeply tend to take the most damage, not in big, dramatic moments, but in accumulation. The small unkindnesses that add up. The environments that ask you to be less than what you are. The slow erosion of spending years in spaces that aren't built for people like you. Dr. Aaron's research found that highly sensitive people thrive dramatically when they're in supportive environments and struggle dramatically when they're not, far more than their less sensitive counterparts. The same sensitivity that becomes extraordinary in the right conditions becomes exhausting in the wrong ones, which means this isn't about changing who you are, it's about changing what you expose yourself to. Here's a concept worth holding on to, what psychologists call positive overexcitability. It's a term developed by researcher Kazimierz Dabrowski, and it describes something he noticed in people with deep emotional and intellectual lives, an unusual intensity of experience that manifests in everything from a heightened response to beauty, to an almost physical reaction to injustice, to a grief over something lost that feels disproportionate to anyone watching from the outside, but perfectly calibrated from the inside. Dabrowski didn't frame this as pathology. He framed it as developmental potential. The capacity to feel deeply, he argued, is actually correlated with the capacity to grow, to revise yourself, to expand, to become more complex over time. The discomfort is part of the mechanism. You're not falling apart. You're developing. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that feeling everything deeply is unconditionally better than not feeling that way. It isn't always. There are real costs. There's real exhaustion. There are nights when you would genuinely trade some of the depth for a little more peace. But I am saying that the story most people who feel deeply have been told about themselves, that they're too much, too fragile, too wound up in their own internal world, is not an accurate story. It's not even a complete story. It's a story told by people who process differently, living in a culture that was largely designed by and for people who process differently. The science says something else entirely. You have a nervous system that catches what other people miss. You have an emotional intelligence built not on performing empathy, but on actually, neurologically, sharing in other people's experience. You have a relationship with beauty, with grief, with meaning, that most people will only ever approximate. You feel things at full volume in a world that tends to live on mute. That's not your burden to manage. That's your nature to understand. The people who feel everything deeply aren't the ones who need to toughen up. They're the ones who, when they finally stop apologizing for how they're built, tend to create the things and hold the spaces and have the conversations that make other people feel less alone. You've always been the person who makes other people feel less alone. Maybe it's time someone did that for you.